Okay, I am recording now. All right. So yeah, that being said, I am happy to address any questions, comments, or concerns, but I do ask that you keep them until the end of the presentation. However, if you are confused at any point, feel free to look under reactions and raise your hand or pick any reactions, and I will clarify what I'm talking about. So to start us off, I'm going to get my PowerPoint up and running, and then we will get started. Sorry, just a brief technical. There we go. And okay, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So before jumping into this project, I researched other Canadian communities extensively, and my goal was to determine what could work in Sackville, based on the successes of other towns, specifically focusing on Atlantic Canadian municipalities, home to at least one university, and a strong environmental ethos. Essentially, the more like Sackville, the better. This led me to two communities in particular, Wolfville and Halifax, both in Nova Scotia and both home to universities with environmental staff I was able to interview. Wolfville, in my opinion, better models the type of position that would be successful in Sackville. They have a similar population and university town dynamic. Wolfville and Acadia both have environmental positions targeted at reducing emissions and implementing sustainability projects within the community. While both of these people had words of advice to offer in terms of the future of Sackville, I believe that progress would be more efficient if the university and town shared one sustainability coordinator. To illustrate the need for this staff person and their potential role in the community, I undertook the organization and management of a 3-stream waste program at 3 apartment buildings in Sackville. Waste management represents a tangible example of the opportunities within the community and the possibilities that arrive with a sustainability coordinator. Furthermore, it's a concern of students and town residents alike, myself included, and has previously been attempted in the community. I wanted to know what barriers inhibited the success of past attempts and how they could be overcome to ensure that they do not deter future sustainable progress. Therefore, the coops waste management project began at 172B, 174, and 178 Main Street. This required educational materials, which were delivered before the project began, waste bins for all 3 streams, additional waste pickups, 3 waste audits, and the time, resources, and support of a variety of community partners. The purpose of this project would be evaluated via 3 waste audits where the contents of all 3 streams from all 3 apartment buildings would be analyzed at Eco360, and the weights of the clear stream would be recorded at each pickup to determine how the weight was impacted by the project. This was to determine if tenants could properly sort waste with only 1 project explanation, 1 sorting guide, and bags from all 3 streams, which would be available to them in their laundry rooms throughout the duration of the project. And if the amount of waste headed toward the landfill was reduced, we would consider that a success. I wanted to model a successful 3-stream waste sorting system within the community to demonstrate how it could work on a larger scale, and also what steps would lead to successful execution of this project long-term. This would also create, oh, someone wants to be admitted. There we go. This would also create a blueprint for the implementation of future projects and sustainable development, the relevant town staff, community players, and the sustainability coordinator. Also, by incorporating education and partnerships within the community, the importance of businesses and organizations like Mount Allison became clearer. It also highlighted the need for a full-time staff person to manage all of these players, as demonstrated by my role during my summer internship where I took that on, and by this key players diagram. So I'll give you just a second to kind of take that in. but basically the key player diagram highlights some of the many environmental relationships as they exist within Sackville, specifically as they relate to this type of project. As you can see, the key component connecting these businesses and organizations is the sustainability coordinator, which is right in the center of all of this. And that, like I previously mentioned, that's kind of what I did this summer and year when I managed this type of project. Here are some photos of the, oh, sorry. Was someone talking? No, okay. Here are some photos of the apartment buildings I'm referring to, specifically up in the top, for anyone who may not be familiar with the coops, as well as which bins we added for the project. So as you can see, these larger brown bins are the existing bins, which are used for the clear stream, and then the smaller totes were added for the blue and green stream. And because the bins are different for the clear garbage, we were only able to weigh those bins each pickup because the truck has a scale that automatically does that. So the green and blue were visually evaluated each pickup, and they were either a quarter or 3/4 to completely full. And eventually the blue totes were always overflowing. So later on, more had to be added, which you can kind of see in the lower photos. So on to my results. The results ended up supporting the theory that tenants would be able to reduce the waste headed to the landfill and properly sort their waste, which will be highlighted in the following graphs. This first graph compares the 2019 year and the 2021 year of the combined garbage weights at 172B, 174, and 178 Main Street. So each green line represents a different waste pickup where all of the garbage from the building's weights were combined. So the lighter green, 2019-2020, and the darker green is the pilot project year. Overall, the weights are lower in the second half of the graph, as you can see kind of after this initial spikes. Overall, the green, dark green is lower, other than the final pickup. So before we look at this data more closely, it's important to consider how the COVID-19 pandemic could have impacted the data. Specifically, in March of 2020, the university switched to completely online course delivery, and many students moved out of Sackville. The weights would be much lower for these pickups, as we can see in this final collection for the light green, which is that year. So this was March 25th, which was around the time most of the students had already left Sackville, and can account for the kind of larger weight in the pilot project year, even though previously it mostly is lower. So this graph better illustrates the trend, where the light green line is 2019-2020 and the dark green line is the pilot project year. After only a few months of this new waste program, the pilot project had lower garbage weights. The red circle in the graph represents the pickups from mid-December, which was only 2 months after the project began, indicating that there was a quick learning curve in terms of switching to this new type of waste management. So tenants would have also spent more time in their apartments during the pandemic, which generates more waste. So for example, they're not going to restaurants or cafes, and a lot of people were ordering more online to reduce their contact. So taking this into consideration, the fact that the pilot project year had lower weights is even more impressive. So when we look at this photo slide, I wanted to give everyone an idea of what a waste audit entails before we actually discuss the results. So the waste is brought to Eco360 and sorted into categories for each stream. This determines how much each stream was contaminated. So basically how much waste was in each stream that didn't belong there. And this is also the overall breakdown of what is thrown out, which is specifically relevant in a later graph. So in order to reduce the margins of error associated with the weights of waste audit to audit, the data was converted into percentages. And this also makes it a little bit easier to look at. So each bar represents what percentage of the blue stream was that material, and the different colors represent the different audits. So the third audit, which is represented by the lightest green, had the lowest contamination rate of all of the audits, so the least amount of garbage. This indicates that tenants' ability to properly sort waste improved throughout the duration of the project. So they got better as the project went on. There were also equal amounts or higher amounts of each type of recyclable in audit 3, indicating that there are less of these recyclable materials in green and clear streams. So for example, we see the most paper and cardboard in audit 3, which is kind of right in the middle of the graph, which indicates that there's probably not much paper and cardboard in the compost or the garbage streams as there was in the first 2 audits, which is just kind of something we can infer from the data. So to determine the success of the project, I also looked at the contamination rates from each audit and compared them to a residential waste audit from 2021. This was to determine if the coops tenants' sorting abilities were on par with other parts of the community. These percentages show us that of the 3 apartment audits and the 1 residential audit, the coops had the lowest contamination rate. So the least amount of materials that didn't belong in the recycling was in the 3rd coops audit. And these numbers were also well within the accepted range of contamination according to Eco 360. So we're at about 16% and generally 15% or 10 to 20 is accepted. This further supports the conclusion that with proper education and practice, tenants can sort waste, and there is no need to enforce this new waste system. Residents pretty much do that on their own. So to further analyze the standard of waste sorting at the coops, a professional at Eco 360 was consulted to determine how each stream compared to the residential program. Overall, the coops apartment waste was equally or better sorted than residential household waste. Specifically, when we look at the blue bags, they were equally sorted in the apartments, but they were cleaner in the apartments. The green bags were better sorted in the apartments, and the clear bags were equally sorted or better sorted. And for the clear bag final audit, the coops had about 38.1 kilograms of rejected material, whereas the residential waste had 40.8, and the coops had about 12.9 kilograms of recyclables in their garbage, which shouldn't have been there, and the residential had far more at 28.6 kilograms. So while these numbers aren't extremely different, it does represent that within a short period of time, the coops residents were able to reach that same level of standard. So to answer our first question, yes, in 6 months, they were able to reach the same level as residential waste. And question 2, does this type of system require an enforcement or accountability program? No, the residents will just sort their waste properly. So next, I looked at the types of barriers that had to be overcome in order to make this project a success. So 2 of the significant barriers that were identified for the long-term continuation of this project were a lack of funds and a lack of precedent, especially as it relates to the staff person that was required to manage this sustainable project. So this project set an example for future projects that relate to both the town and university. The key component being a central person acting as a point of contact and a project manager. COVID-19 definitely impacted the project with the changing borders and restrictions, but it did not impede the overall success. Pretty much all of the goals were achieved. Funding is available, but often not for long-term infrastructural changes like waste management. Therefore, an alternate strategy must be identified, as this project was the result of many fees being waived or costs being covered by outside sources. Essentially, this project was free, which isn't sustainable long-term for an implementation of a comprehensive waste management program in Sackville. So my key recommendations are as follows. Creating a shared sustainability coordinator position is essential to ensure the success of future initiatives and development within the Sackville community. Because this person would serve Sackville and Mount Allison, the position would be funded by both the town and university. However, to avoid confusion and ensure that the position is as is as efficient as possible, they would only report to the town. The reason that this is my recommendation is because of how significant a role Mount Allison plays in the community. They would be benefiting disproportionately from this position and therefore should be held accountable to pay for a portion of it, because they are a large contributor of waste and energy consumption and a large employer within the community. This position would also improve the town and gown relationship and cut costs without confusion regarding employment status. The sustainability coordinator would oversee the implementation and management of projects, such as an inclusive waste management system, and they would be able to ensure their success. Another recommendation is to petition the provincial government to ban certain materials in landfills, as was previously done in Nova Scotia. This reduces the fees associated with incorporating businesses and apartments in the green and blue systems, because the larger the project, the larger the program, the more cost efficient. So making it province-wide would reduce these fees. Furthermore, including businesses and apartments in a Sackville-wide system would also reduce fees, rather than asking landlords to contract out to haulers one by one. In a meeting with a Miller Waste Hauling Company, they also agreed that the size of this project would mean that contracting to more than one hauler would be a good strategy. So basically, including everybody in Sackville while petitioning the government would ensure that there isn't kind of a lull in opportunity, but also the most cost-effective route is being taken. So this contract would be funded by the town, as well as landlords and business owners, to kind of spread around the cost, so nobody is facing these astronomical hike in fees. I also wanted to take a second to acknowledge everyone who helped this project come to light. So without the cooperation and participation from the following people and organizations, this project would not have been possible. Therefore, I would like to extend immense gratitude and thanks to Frank Arsenault and Jeff Traver from Miller Waste, Patrick Michaud-Langis and Marc-André Chesson, and Jenna Alderson from Eco360, Charles Esterbrooks, the Coops landlord, Dwayne Acton, Jamie Burke, former Mayor Hyam, and Brianna McLeod from Sackville Town staff, the Alpac distributors who donated bags for all of the apartment residents for this project, and of course, my supervisor, Dr. Fox. So what now? Now that I've shared my results and recommendations, what's the next step for the Sackville community? First, I ask that everyone take time to consider everything I just shared. This was an extremely information-heavy presentation, so feel free to reach out anytime with any questions or clarifications. I've included my 2 emails on the slide. I'm not sure if my Mount Allison email stays active, and I'm graduating soon, so either works. Then I'm hoping to hear about a commitment to achieve these goals within a designated time period, or start to achieve these goals within a designated time period, especially from any incoming councillors or mayoral candidates. This project, the students, the Mount Allison Students Union, and the New Brunswick Students Alliance are resources at your disposal. This is a significant undertaking, so I would recommend that the town and university work together to petition the government on both a municipal and university level. I also recommend moving this motion within the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick to facilitate student support and partnerships on this issue province-wide, kind of a more the merrier situation. I would encourage taking action to ensure that the momentum that has been built within this project with community partners not be lost. So kind of continuing this project as soon as possible. And I also was recently informed of a provincial grant awarded to Sackville to fund a part-time environmental staff position. This is a great opportunity to take advantage of the research I've done over the past year to save this person time and energy. So when they're familiarizing themselves with the inner workings of implementing sustainability issues within the community, they don't have to redo the research I've already done. I have this research and anyone can use it. And then finally, thank you for listening and making space in your schedules. I know this is a busy time of year, and I really look forward to seeing this come to fruition. So for now, are there any questions, comments, or concerns? I'm going to try and stop screen sharing, but I'm not sure I know how. So, oh, okay, there we go. There we go. So yeah, any questions, comments, concerns, graphs you want me to go back on, anything like that, let me know.
Maggie, I had a quick question and comment,
Yeah, sure.
I guess. Sorry, it's Andrew Black. I'm a current town councillor. I just wanted to say that the presentation was fantastic. This is something that we have sort of talked about a little bit the last 5 years of it's come up a couple of times on council, various groups, especially during the climate strikes. There were some people who came to council asking if there was a possibility that the town would try to get garbage sorting in apartment buildings in Sackville, which some of us agreed with. We looked at the dollar value, of course, and we weren't prepared to do anything at that time, which was unfortunate. But this is wonderful. So I had just a couple of questions. One of them is kind of silly, and one of them is serious. The first silly question is, when you looked at garbage pickup with residential, I guess you're just looking at the garbage and you're not really looking at who's throwing it out. But I wondered if there's any research that you have done or anything out there that looks at age demographic and the capability of sorting garbage effectively.
Yeah, that's a great question. Not silly at all. So as I mentioned, this project, what you guys are getting is a glimpse of an overall honors thesis. So as part of my thesis, I actually looked at how education informs environmental behavior in different communities around the world. And different types of education are useful for different age groups. So university students, I took the approach of knocking door to door, telling them what my project was, letting them see my face and see I'm your peer and this is something I care about, please support me. And not all the coops residents are university students, but the majority are. In terms of younger students, this type of education associated with this is best to do with elementary age students because they go home and tell their parents. And in terms of their ability to understand, I actually gave a presentation, much simplified version, to a Port Elgin elementary school class. And I discussed more why we recycle and why we compost and why it's important. And a lot of them had some really great questions. Personal level, I've been involved working with my school to improve waste sorting since I was in the 2nd grade. I was a part of an elementary school and I went classroom to classroom and taught people how to sort their waste. So while it is something that takes time, as the graphs showed you, and it takes practice, it's definitely not age specific. I even brought this presentation, I brought this project home with me and discussed it with my family over Christmas break. And my grandfather, who's just turned 80, mentioned how he oversaw monitoring the recycling program in his retiree complex. So it's kind of education looks different age to age, but it is something that can be universally understood, which is why I chose it to exemplify a sustainability initiative within the Sackville community.
Okay, yeah, because looking at the percentages of the research that you were looking at with the buildings, the coop, is that what you called the coop? Is that what you called it? Yeah. The percentages that they were able to get, that low percentage as opposed to residential percentage of, for example, recyclable material being in the wrong bag. I just wondered what kind of educational component could be spread to the rest of the residential community within Sackville. But that's a question maybe for another time. The other thing I just wanted to know, which is a quick one. So I see you're recording this. Is there a possibility for the rest, like for all of us to get a recording, or any other reports, or the full report? When do we see that, or when can we get that, or are we going to get that?
Yeah, so I can see John's nodding his head. Definitely will post this recording. As for the full report, like I mentioned, it's my honors thesis. So when it's completely done, it's going to be about 100 pages. So before I share that with anyone, I'm going to cut out my kind of academic fluff, I'll call it. Dr. Fox is making a face at me, but because I recognize not everyone wants to read my lit review or my introduction. So I'm going to cut it down to more what you saw in this presentation, kind of make a 1 to 2 page document ideally, and then I will make that available to anybody who was here or anyone who was interested, because I recognize that kind of time is valuable, and not everyone wants to spend their nights reading my papers.
Well, I'll say one last thing, and then somebody else can ask questions. The counselors, for sure, and I'm sure obviously people in the academic community are used to reading long documents full of material that they may or may not otherwise want to read, particularly with counselors when it comes to the Local Governance Act or whatever. But there's a lot of beefy material out there that we read. So don't be too quick to take out the fluff, as you call it, because it might be something interesting and we might pick something out. But anyway,
Okay.
I take your point. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was wonderful.
Thank you. And that is something, when I wrote my thesis, I kept in mind, I do want it to be a resource. So I tried to make sure that I explain everything in a way that if you had no idea what recycling is other than sorting your waste, you can understand the document. So it can be kind of accessible to anyone who wants to read it. Is there any other questions, comments, anything?
Maggie, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that presentation. I was looking forward to that. Again, as a project that I was very interested in and had some involvement with you on. So thank you for doing that. And it is something that has been discussed, I think, from a council level, but has also been discussed at a regional level. I do sit on the technical committee with the Solid Waste Commission at Eco 360, and it's been discussed there. So other municipalities are talking about it as well. So I would like to get a copy of your report if I could, because I'm very interested in the data that you, and I did try to look at some of the graphs, but I would definitely be interested in looking at that further. And it sounds like that could become available at some point. So I look forward to looking into that a little bit further, and likely I will have the opportunity to dive into this a little bit further with Council Eco 360. And I think it is something that we may see a lot of regions jumping on board with. And I know in discussions that I've had with residents in apartment buildings, there's a lot of people that want to sort and are sorting, but they don't have a means to put it in the right bin. And I think as we talk, there are some challenges, logistical challenges with that, with 3 bins versus 1 bin and so on and so forth at some of the facilities. But I think with everybody's support, I think there's ways to overcome any of those obstacles. So again, look forward to diving into the information, and thank you very much for the report, presentation, and everything you've done on this project.
Thanks, Dwayne. And I will definitely make that available to everyone who's here or has previously kind of shown an interest. And I also I cut down some of the material for the sake of efficiency. So there are more graphs and there's more data that I can share with you. And like I mentioned, I am also a resource. So if there are questions or kind of very specific questions about one specific part and you want to go into more detail, the educational aspects, the data, what Miller Waste has recommended to me as the steps moving forward, any of that stuff, I am more than happy to schedule a meeting. And this project final report as a thesis will be available as of Friday, because that's when I have to hand it in to the university. But as a shortened report, it will probably be about a week or so after that. Are there any other questions or comments or anything you want re-explained?
Maggie,
Yeah,
congratulations on this.
thank you.
It's pretty incredible to see this finally come to a conclusion, and a job well done on a school
Thank you.
project, especially in the middle of the pandemic. So I have a question, I guess, with regards to the implementation of this. And one of the things we often struggle with as a municipality is how to communicate the benefits of some of the research and projects that have been undertaken. So is there a way for us to pitch this as a potential economic savings to a landlord who are currently paying, I guess, to get rid of all of that garbage now, where they could be rewarded for this type of program?
Yes and no. So the no side of it is immediately there is an increase in cost, because as you saw from the photos, that was a more temporary solution, but for the most part, there needs to be 3 bins. So whether they're small, medium, large, split bins, that's kind of something that the hauling company has more of a say in, because they can kind of tell you what type of bin you need. So you have to pay for those bins, which is a one-time fee. And then there's the additional cost for the pickup, which is extremely costly if one landlord or 2 landlords say, I want to sort my waste, I'm going to contract a hauler. That's going to cost a lot of money, because the gas to just get from Moncton and back is quite expensive. And what I'm kind of recommending is by including every business and apartment and house in Sackville into one system, whether that contracts 1 hauler or 2 haulers or 3 haulers, doesn't increase the cost. What lowers the cost there is that truck is now coming to Sackville to make so many stops that the percentage each business owner or landlord has to pay is lowered. And then the kind of long-term benefit is that the tipping fee, so basically how much you have to pay per kilogram to dispose of your waste, is lower for blue and green than for clear. It's not like 100% lower or anything. But it is a significant enough decrease that it would eventually become a affordable switch. And something I didn't mention, but I did have a meeting with Miller Waste about, is that for Sackville, the only way to know exactly how much this would cost and the exact benefits versus cost is to do a cost benefit analysis. And because of my position as a university student, Miller Waste isn't allowed to share the data required for the cost benefit analysis. And I'm not allowed to say, can you do a cost benefit analysis of someone who contracts you, when I'm not that person. But I would say a cost benefit analysis would give the exact numbers of how incorporating all of the community reduces fees. And so the increase would be lower and would be potentially kind of made up for with the lower tipping fees. But realistically, the cheapest way to do this is the more people that are involved, the lower the costs are. So because all of the trucks are starting in Moncton, if they're doing Sackville on a geographic loop, so I'm coming and I'm doing this quadrant and going back, I'm coming and I'm doing this quadrant and going back, that's less expensive than saying, okay, Faro's coming and only going to the businesses that contract Faro, because it's not gas efficient. So if Riverview and Port Elgin and Moncton and Miramichi were all a part of this mandated province-wide waste sorting, that's when those costs get lower. And that's the type of thing you see in Nova Scotia, because they were able to do it province-wide, the fees are reduced. So when you see those 50% increases, those are the fees that are associated with one hauling company one business owner adding all 3 streams and the hauling company making a trip to get them for them. That's that astronomical increase. There will still be an increase, especially initially, but the more people involved, the lower that gets. And the cost benefit analysis will kind of show why sorting waste this way also benefits Sackville in terms of achieving the environmental goals that are outlined in Sustainable Sackville from 2010, or the kind of Tantramar sustainability plan. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. And I guess one last question. What about the feedback from Mr. Estabrooks, who owns the apartment buildings? Is Charles happy that this has now come to an end, or is he possibly looking at continuing this and setting the example based on the research that you've now been able to provide?
Yeah, so it doesn't end for him for another 8 days, but I spoke with him briefly before I left Sackville, and from what I gathered, he's very happy with the project. It really didn't cause him any frustrations, other than in the beginning we had to find a place to put the bins. But other than that, he just sat back and he didn't have to do anything. So he was very happy with that aspect of it. And he mentioned to me he knew his tenants were happier having recycling, which he enjoyed. But in terms of the cost, I wouldn't even recommend he do it alone, because it's going to be so expensive for just one landlord to do it. But he did kind of seem interested in the results, although he's not here. I invited him, but it kind of was a mixed response. He was happy with the project, happy we did it, no regrets there, but recognizes that it would be kind of expensive for him to do that alone. Any other questions?
If I could, Maggie, mine.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I committed a Zoom faux pas. So I'd like to apologize, because I think that while I was happily sitting with my camera off eating my supper, I think my microphone was on and I'm mortified. So if anyone was hearing some chewing and clinking and stuff, that was me. So I'd like to apologize for that first.
No problem.
Secondly, I'd like to thank you for this, because as Andrew mentioned, this is something that council has been looking into, and I, for one, have never liked the fact that apartment buildings and businesses don't need to sort their garbage. So thank you for doing this and having providing us with this start on information and all of the research. So hopefully we can continue to move forward and you know, maybe do something with this. So thanks for that.
No problem. And like I said, any more questions later on, my emails are available to anyone who wants them.
I have
Yeah.
a question, Maggie. I guess as you've gone through this project, and this is really great. It's great to have this information. I look forward to even getting your presentation itself, just to kind of be able to review those slides. When you talk about the province and the province kind of adapting this type of process, I'm sure we're all well aware of how, depending on where you live in our province, we sort differently. So has there been any discussion in regards to that going through this project, and the thought process on how do we get to that level? Because it's confusing. It's confusing for New Brunswickers. They move from Fredericton to Sackville, or Sackville to St. John, and they're doing things differently. And if we want people to embrace sorting and getting into 3-stream or whatever it is, how do we kind of get to that level? And I'm just kind of wondering if that's any of that conversations happened during your work.
Yeah, so education has been a big part of this, and even province to province, recycling and composting and waste management is so different. Especially Sackville is just 15 minutes from Nova Scotia, and as I mentioned, I'm from Nova Scotia, and Halifax has a much different sorting system than Sackville. And so first, I'm going to answer your question Sackville specific, because of the nature of the town as a university town. There is a lot of overturn in terms of residents. A lot of people come, stay for 4 years, and then leave, which is why I put such a big emphasis on education, because you can kind of put out a educational campaign, a big blast, and say, we're switching, and this is how we're doing our waste sorting. But then as students come and students go, that knowledge of how to use the waste system leaves with them. So in the beginning, as a part of my internship and also my project, Marc-Andre from Eco360 presented a waste sorting explanation guide in the beginning of the Mount Allison orientation week. So as my role as a Mount Allison volunteer, I decided to kind of bring that into the orientation so that the second students are coming to the university, they're learning how to sort waste, because students are a unique example of coming to a town, kind of interacting within the entire community and then leaving. So that's something that I think no matter what type of waste sorting Sackville does, if it's different from the rest of New Brunswick or if it's from the same, that type of waste education has to stay a part of a yearly ongoing educational process so that the knowledge isn't lost after students graduate. And that's something I've kind of discussed with the relevant people in terms of the university orientation as well. And then in terms of the province as a whole, as you mentioned, it's much easier if everyone's doing the same thing. I mean, ideally, all of Canada would sort their waste the same way, and it would make the most sense. But that's not always practical for the kind of how much time it takes to change the infrastructure of a community, because waste management really is an infrastructural issue. So this is why it's so important to petition the provincial government, which wasn't actually my initial kind of plan. When I started this project, that's not where I thought it was going to go. It wasn't until I met with Miller Waste a second time that this kind of became my main recommendation after hiring a staff person. And that's because petitioning the government to ban materials, so ban any organics and ban anything that would go into recyclables at the landfills, means that even if municipalities sort their wastes differently, what's going to the landfill is always the same. Even if one municipality is doing wet dry and another is doing all three streams, what is going to the garbage is always the same because of those banned materials. So it gives municipalities the freedom to determine what they're going to do with the waste that can't go to landfills. Are we going to bring it to Eco 360? Are we going to have our own sorting facility? Are we going to have a community compost? And they kind of have that freedom, but it does bring a level of coordination to the province as a whole. Ideally, everyone would sort into 3 streams. It would make everything easier. But if that doesn't happen, having this ban on materials really does make any sort of progress as it relates to waste management much easier, because we know no matter what, that can't go to the landfill. Does that answer your question?
No, that's great. Thanks very much. It yeah, definitely clear. So so basically start with banned materials and then
Work our way from there.
It'll sort its way from there. So,
exactly.
No, great. Thanks very much.
No problem. I know that this is a busy time of year and probably a busy time of night for many people. So if anyone has more questions, I'm going to be here until everyone's gone. But if anyone has somewhere to be or has reached their Zoom limit for the day, feel free to log off. Like John mentioned, this will be recorded. So.
Maggie, of course, thank you for this. I've been close to the ground on it. It's great, but I rarely hear a whole bunch of people in the community asking someone for their honors thesis. So that's a good start. So congrats on that. But we're probably a little light on the gown side of the equation here, which is as you acknowledge and address in your thesis, this is a constant sort of possible tension, but as you pointed out, we somehow have miraculously really come together on forming the bubble. Why not a recycling bubble? Why not a volunteer bubble? Why not? So I think those things are in motion. The other thing too, I guess, from the university side is that we tend to always talk about the university with the capital U, the president, just like we would talk about the town as the mayor, but there are so many other people and groups involved. So I think what we see here and what we've seen for a long time, and most of the councillors would see that, as well as the role of the student government, for example, the enormous impact of the Green Investment Fund that the student government designed, I think, a decade ago. So having like the sustainability coordinator who's on the call tonight is on. So student government is often taking lead. And I see next year's VP External is on the call tonight. So I think there's a mechanism within the university where we're starting to see some changes and partnerships there. And perhaps, you know, as you say, we've been down this road before, and many people, we've made the proposals, but what other sort of elements of the university, I guess, would you see as being critically important for abandoning whatever it is they currently do? And I know Perry is on the call as well as the energy sort of guru at Mount A, and Perry's been down this road many times, also the president of EOS. So, you know, not to say that Mount Allison is disinterested, but it is that that notion, like before, imagine if we developed our own pandemic response and the town developed their own. We would now say that was completely, you know, and look at the success we've had. So how do we keep this momentum on the university side of it, I think, in terms of your research?
And that's a great question. And it's part of the reason that I have suggested that this sustainability coordinator is a person who is a member of town staff. They work with the town, they report to the town, but having Mount Allison take the responsibility for partial funding, and I'm not saying it has to be a 50-50 split, like that's not my area of expertise, but having Mount Allison responsible for partial funding means that this coordinator will understand the significance of Mount Allison in the community. You can't step off campus and not see Mount Allison everywhere you go. Even in a kind of simplified example of university town relationships, students at Mount Allison have been volunteering at the Drew Nursing Home since I've been here. We get assigned a resident and we visit each other or they don't visit us, we visit them for 4 years. And the resident I was assigned is the former head of the Mount Allison Economics Department. Offered to help me with my homework. So that you can't be a member of the Sackville community without being a member of the Mount Allison community, and vice versa. And that's what I tried to exemplify in my project. Is technically, in terms of my thesis, that's just the university. In terms of waste management in an apartment building, that's just the town. But what happens when those buildings are mostly occupied by students? And what happens when the people most interested in my thesis don't even work in the department that I'm writing it for? So I kind of took the approach of, I'm hoping that this thesis can be the beginning of a relationship where we take the projects, the scientific research, the humanities research, or whatever's being done at Mount Allison, and we use it to benefit the community. Part of my initial research involved looking at how the disconnect between science and science-informed policy, and how we have this home of this hub of knowledge in the center of the community, but half of the research that's going on there doesn't always get shared with the relevant policymakers. And when it does, I struggle to read a lot of the academic documents because they're written for such a specific group of people. And that's why when I'm writing my thesis and when I wrote the past sections, I went through and said, if I had never heard of environmental studies and I had never heard of Mount Allison, would I be able to understand what's going on here? And that was my goal, to show that education and community development and community bottom-up initiatives don't have to be separate. So this sustainability coordinator, in my mind, is also a great resource for student research and student interns. Mount Allison has so much funding, but it has specifications. For example, internships that have to be in New Brunswick. You can take that funding anywhere. I'm an example of that. I got funding for a summer internship and I worked for a local NGO, RCE Tantrumer, with Dr. Fox. So by kind of taking advantage of the resources that Mount Allison has, and instead of taking them around the world or around the province, we take them back into the community, it kind of creates this closed system of policy and education working together that kind of benefits us both. I'm getting a grade from this, I'm benefiting. I'm getting research experience for when I graduate and apply to jobs. And then anyone who wants this data and this information is also benefiting. Does that answer your question? It's kind of a long answer.
No, that's great. Wonderful. It makes me very happy to hear students that consider themselves members of the community. Thanks.
any more questions, like I said, I'll be here, but I will not be offended if anyone takes the time now to step out. So if anyone does decide to leave, I just wanted to say thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I know that the time of year is busy. The invitation was last minute, so I'm really happy everyone who came took the time to be here. And if anyone has any more in-depth questions or longer questions, like I said, I'll stay on the call. But if anyone else wants to kind of get on with their night, feel free. And John has something.
Yeah, Maggie, I just wanted to say one last, quick thing before people start to hop off. First of all, thank you again so much for taking the time tonight to show us and to share this with everybody. It's pretty clear, I think, to everyone in the room that Maggie is without a doubt the expert, the student expert on this right now. I've never seen somebody so passionate about this in our community. And that said, Maggie is certainly not the only student that wants to see this sort of thing implemented in Sackville. I have to say, throughout the years, the MASU, and me personally, I've heard so many students remark about how wonderful it would be to have this sort of system implemented. And so with that said, I know I can see on the MASU's end of that over the months and years to come, we're going to be following up with everybody on where things are at and ways we might be able to collaborate and help support this based on the wonderful research and work that Maggie has started. So thank you again on behalf of the MASU, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Maggie, can I just ask one more question? I know
Yeah, go for it.
John's comments were sort of a close to the night, but I'll ask a question and then maybe I'll email you another one that might take a little bit longer if that's okay. Just really quickly, you had mentioned UMNB being involved, possibly lobbying on a municipal level to UMNB to maybe get something pressed with the membership. Can you speak to that more? Did you do any research into that and how municipalities might be able to approach lobbying bodies like the UMNB, or I mean, it's federally is probably a little too blue sky like the FCM, but can you speak to UMNB at all?
Not really. I will admit that I really leaned into my role as a student, and I took the approach of focusing on action-based research and academic-based research, which is why my suggestion is less of this is what you should do and more of a you have this resource and it would be effective to utilize the resource, because I'm recommending municipalities work together. There's a body connecting municipalities. It seems like a good next step, but I can't claim to be an expert on the inner workings of the organization to any degree.
Okay, that's fair. The one thing I will say is I think it's fortunate that you have done this research and that you're at Mount A, which is in Sackville, because over the last 5 years that we've been on council, we've lobbied we've asked UMNB to lobby on behalf of the membership in the province for various issues, and pretty much, and I might say every single motion that we've put forward to UMNB has been accepted and by all the membership. So maybe if this continues and Sackville puts a motion forward to UMNB, we'll be successful based on our history. But
yes,
anyway,
that
thanks.
is a hopeful stance for sure.
Thanks, and I'll email you something later on as well. But thanks again,
Okay.
just wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so anyone feel free to end the Zoom meeting and I will stay on until everyone's gone for any lingering questions. My whole night is going to be dedicated to recycling project, so I have no problem staying to answer questions.
Well, I'll say
Yeah,
good night. So good night, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
And Maggie, maybe on that note, you could probably stop the recording now on your end if you think it's a good time.
Definitely.